Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. What I have for you today is the KRORssguard install that I have just finished up for John. John was a previous customer and we've worked together very well on this Saber. And I think it's fair to say that the previous install that I did went a little bit smoother than this one did. I'm going to explain what happened a little bit later down the line, but everything is all well and good now. So let's get on with talking about this Saber. So John, when you receive the box, you'll receive it obviously as you received it in the first place, with the normal sort of Apple display style box that Sabers provides with the hilt in the first place. They always take forever to open these things. And on the inside, I've forgotten the piece of foam that goes over the top, but here you go. Here is the KRORssguard Saber. It has a custom installed chassis that I've designed myself that is fully removable. It has NeoPixel accent LEDs, it has a crystal chamber, it has a rotating crystal chamber, it has the capability for Bluetooth, but this Saber does not have Bluetooth. It has two buttons on the outside of the Saber itself, it has two buttons on the chassis, it has an 18650 removable battery, it has a Proffieboard, it has a speaker, it has 6 metal parts, and yeah, probably some more stuff that I'm probably forgetting at this point. So, John, when you receive it, you'll receive the hilt in the middle as always, and you'll receive your 2 custom side blades at the edge like that. And underneath the side blades, you can probably see here, there are all of the sort of extra pieces that you wanted me to keep, like the blade plugs, the original engines. And just a point on those blade plugs, actually, let me see if I can find one. I would highly, they're in this little bag that I've made for you, so I would highly suggest not using these blade plugs in this Saber again, because these plugs are all metal, and if these plugs touch the stock Custom Works NeoPixel connectors that are in there, every single pin is going to get shorted in one go, and that's game over for the Saber. So I'll give them back to you, given that it was a part of the Saber in the first place, but I would highly suggest not using them. I would honestly suggest once you get them, just throw them out. So these will be under your blades like that, so you'll have everything ready to go. Also, I don't know if you spotted, but underneath the blades there are the original plastic engines that came with the hilt. And part of the reason that I had this custom chassis done was that a lot of people were unhappy originally with the plastic engines that came with the Kylo. So I've still included them in the kit that I'm sending back to John, as he wanted to use the original engines as reference for the weathering, which I have not done on this hilt. John has said that he will do the weathering as part of the install. However, I still have done a little bit of paint work on some of the 3D printed pieces, so let's get to having a look at that now. So here is the hilt itself. I'll just get this box out of the way. And just like that, just with a little bit of movie magic, we are now looking at the hilt at a much closer up angle. So I'd like to go into talking about the first issue that I ran into with this hilt. And John already knows this, but I will relay this information for anyone else that's watching. When I originally got this hilt, I followed the instructional video posted by Sabers about how to disassemble the hilt, as I was trying to get a good understanding of the workings of the hilt and how it's assembled and what the sort of capabilities are for chassis installation, stuff like that. So in disassembling it, there is a instruction to take the 2 little grub screws out that are in here. You can see those there. Take those out and then put a thumb in this this side piece, the side emitter quillion here, and then twist it like that to unscrew it, and then the side pieces come off like that. In doing that, it actually stripped the paintwork on the top of this side piece here. I ended up having to find an airbrush, and I think it was about 17 attempts that it took to actually get this this black paint blend looking normal. It's not going to be the same as when the Replicator did it in the first place, but I thought I would at least mention this is an issue that I ran into with this hilt. But it has now been fixed, and maybe it doesn't look as good, but I'm at least pleased, and I hope that John is pleased with the outcome of this as well. So, moving on from there, we'll just have a little look around the hilt. One of the pieces that you might notice is missing, besides the two engines that are originally plastic, is at the bottom of the hilt here, there's usually a sort of vented piece that the speaker would normally shoot the sound out of, but that piece is now gone from this hilt to accommodate the lower chassis, sorry, not lower chassis, lower engine now being a part of the chassis. So the chassis goes all the way from up here, all the way down to the bottom of the hilt. So it is a full-size chassis for this hilt that I've made. So taking a quick look around the hilt, we've got the ignition button at the top here, we've got the auxiliary button at the bottom, we've got our two slots for side blades with their freshly installed blade plugs and grub screws on the bottom, and then there is the top blade plug there with the grub screw on the side here. So if you want to tighten a blade in, you can unscrew the little screw in the side here, put the blade in, tighten it up, and then you are good to go. So this Kylo is actually from the KR version 1 run of this hilt, so it still has the old fins on here. I've been asked not to change those, and it has the non-accurate belt clip here, which, John, you're more than welcome to change in the future. It's very, very simple. There are just two screws there. If you want to pick up a belt clip from JJ Industries to make it more screen accurate, then it's very, very easy to do. It has the pommel cap glued in the correct orientation, like that, and it has the 4 wire clips on the side, a couple of which I had to reinforce with a little bit of extra JB weld. And actually, while we're on the topic of issues I had with the hilt, let's talk about the other one. So while I was disassembling this hilt, I realised that this top shroud piece is attached to the 3 emitters with 2 screws on one side under this little control box right here. So there's a screw here and a screw here. And to take the control box off, there is a screw behind the engine, which you can get to when the chassis is out. So in taking that control box off, you can then get to those 2 screws. And in undoing those 2 screws, I realised that one of them was stripped. So I ended up having to bore out the screw hole to larger than it normally is and tap it to, instead of an M3, to an M4 size and use a much larger screw, which you can very, very slightly see from the top. There's the tiniest little silver reflection right there. I don't know if you can see that, but that is the only outcome of having that issue with the screws there. Those screws have then been treated with some Loctite thread locker so that the rattle at the top of the hilt is no longer an issue. And to treat the rattle at the middle of the hilt, I've used the longer screw included with the KRORssguard box set to press up against my chassis. And my chassis around this area is specifically designed to be a little bit wider so that you can sand it down to have a better fit between the top and the bottom section here. So to also reinforce the top section and the bottom section, we've got this 3D printed ring by Tim at Modular Chassis System. He's a very talented Saber designer, and he's got some great parts for the KRORssguard, including the blade plugs that are included with this install that I've done. So I think that's enough talk about the outside of the hilt. Let's get it open, turn it on, and have a look at how this thing runs. So to get this open, the first thing you want to do is you want to pull on the red wire here to get it out of the top, and then pull it through the first wire clip just like that, just so that the bottom is now separated from the top. The wire is not secured in there in any way, and if you do, you won't be able to change the battery or turn it on or anything, so obviously the wire's got to stay loose. Then what we got to do, we've got to turn it over to the back here where there's this one screw, and you've got to take a 2mm Allen key or hex screwdriver or anything like that, and we'll start unscrewing that. And there we go, screw is now out, so we'll take that and we'll keep it to one side. And then with a firm grip on the top and bottom, we can twist and then pull down to reveal the chassis on the inside of this hilt. So to turn the Saber on, what you can do, there is a switch on this side here, and if you flip it this way, you will see that it starts up and it shows a C's Workshop logo on the OLED screen as it boots up. And then once it's finished booting up, it goes into a sort of crystal animation like that, and we've got some of the accent LEDs already going. I'll get more into the chassis a little bit later down the line, as I want to change the camera angle and get in a little bit closer to it. But what I'd like to do first is actually get the chassis out, because as you can see, it's not, I can pull on this as much as I like, it's not coming out at the moment. So to actually remove the chassis, we need to remove these two screws on the side, and these two screws are used for the J-lock system on the bottom half of the hilt, so that it can twist into place with that satisfying click. So let's get those out, and then we can start working on getting the chassis out. Now it's very important to realise that once this last screw comes out, you'll just see there's a little bit of movement at the top of the chassis where it meets the top of the hilt here. And that's because the aluminium retention ring that is used to secure the top to the bottom of the hilt is actually also securing the chassis. So if you hold the bottom of the chassis and kind of let the ring slide off like that, so you can still keep it in place like that, we'll move the ring out of the way, and then the chassis can come right out like that. Now, something very important to remember just before I move on, there are 3 screws that I had to remove in order to take the chassis out. One of them is longer than the other 2, and it's very important that you keep the long one separate, or at least remember that the long one is different to the other 2 before you start putting the screws back into the hilt, because if you start screwing the long one in the wrong place, it'll leave a horrible circular mark about here on the chassis. So try not to screw those into the wrong place or anything like that. Yay, more movie magic. Anyway, so here is the chassis. And like I said, it features 6 metal parts, a whole bunch of pipes, a whole bunch of other cool Saber stuff. And it has the potential to accommodate Bluetooth, which I'll make a more in-depth guide to this chassis in a video later down the line when I've made my own. John, I must admit, I'm actually quite jealous that I'm sending this back off to you. This has been an ongoing project for about 2 years now, and sending this back is gonna break my heart. So let's just take a quick look around the chassis. What we've got at the top is a stock 10-pole chassis connector, which is used for the 3 blade data pins, the 4 positive blade pins, the 4 negative blade pins, the button 1, button 2, and button ground pin are all connected through this little connector right here. And the receiver for that is on the inside of the hilt here, and there's a little aligning rod right here, so there's like a pin that's a little bit bigger, which is intended to go in the hole in this board right here, so it can only go in one way. So coming down from the 10-pole connector, we've got the first major metal piece, which is the replacement for the upper engine. And now this piece is absolutely gorgeous. I've tried to make the front of it basically as similar as I can to the original piece. I didn't measure it sort of millimeter for millimeter. I sort of looked at it, got the rough shape, and built a design around that. I didn't want to copy it directly. So to a degree, it's still film accurate. But if we have a look around the side, we can see that from this side backwards, it starts to get a little bit more different. We've got some pieces here inspired by the grenade section on the outside. We've got a sort of V8 engine looking type thing. We've got a couple of vents here. There's a couple of tiny fans. There's a little corkscrew type thing going up here. These small rails that are inspired by these larger rails. This back piece, which has a couple of pipes on the inside. A couple of vents. This little sort of dial thing here. Another grenade piece on this side, and another fan. And another one of these suspended rods on the side like that. So that's some of the major details with the top piece of the chassis here. Moving down, we've got this area here, which is sort of inspired by, there's an area in the top of the hilt. I don't know if you'll be able to see it from here, but it kind of has a very similar pattern to this here. And these little pieces right here are actually what supports the chassis on top of this this retention ring right here. So going further down, we've got some aluminium pipes along here, along with the an extension of the blue wire on the outside of the hilt, which has sort of been frayed at the end, you know, implying that this was originally connected to something else, but it's now not anymore because it's just, you know, it's stripped and frayed and everything, sort of capturing the essence of Kylo there. We've also got these 2 bigger brass pipes here. which are used to carry all the wires from the top of the hilt to the bottom of the chassis here. Also up here, there is you might not be able to see it, but there is a tiny little switch. Don't know if you can hear that there. So what that switch does is when you put the bottom half of the chassis, sorry, the hilt, over the chassis here, the hilt will make contact with this motor. So the chassis is, to a degree, aware when it is inside the hilt. And in doing so, it will shut off the motor. And in doing that, it will save a little bit of power, and it'll also save a little bit of noise and vibration as well. So while you can't see the motor, you can't hear it, you can't see it, it doesn't spin, it saves power, and it's just a little bit easier on everyone's lives. So moving further down, we've got the main chassis piece right here, which this is part of the reason that this design has taken so long. This piece was rejected by Shapeways 12 times because of its incredibly complicated design. I ended up having to fill in this wall just so that they could print it. However, I am still really, really happy with the outcome, so obviously now it's an actual part of the hilt anyway. But in making that piece, I've decided to open up these back areas, and you can see here that the chassis rods that support the top and the bottom of the hilt are heat stained, sort of to match the side blades on the outside of the hilt. So on this side we can see directly into the spinning chamber, and let me mention this now, John, I don't know if you've had a spinning chamber chassis before, but it's very important, and this seems pretty obvious, but don't stick your fingers in there or put anything in there, because I've done that once with my old Ogdokiller design, and in doing that, the motor has so much torque that it can rip itself to pieces if the spinning piece gets caught on anything. So make sure that that doesn't get stuck at any point. It does every now and again sort of make a ding sound when the piece sort of hits this metal edge here. That kind of can't be avoided because there's not really any way to support this spinning piece much better than it already has, because if you try and attach it to anything other than the motor shaft, you know, it's not going to spin anymore. So it's kind of got the best support that it can, but, you know, it will still make the odd, like, ding noise. You might hear it later, but like I said, like it's not an issue. It is just sort of the nature of the chassis, with a metal piece spinning, being surrounded by another metal piece. So, moving on, like I said, here is the switch. We've got the red wire coming down here. We've got a little accent pipe right here to kind of look like the energy is coming down this wire into this little component, and it's firing this energy across into this other component here. And there's an LED style that is red on every font that will match that kind of movement, and it will sort of move along slowly while it's off, and it'll move along quicker while it's on. On the back here, we've got the removable battery. It's a little tricky to get out sometimes, but this is the Skywamper battery cover that I've installed for John. So that will just slip in right there with no other support or anything like that. There's a couple of pipes on the side here. These have wires in, and I remember, John, you asked me originally about adding some kind of like accents to these pipes here, like sort of taking a Dremel to them or something and cutting some slots out, which I think would be a really cool design. But like I said, like these pipes are wire support pipes, so they have a couple of wires coming in. Like I believe this one is for the negative battery terminal, this wire is for the speaker. So on top here we've got this sort of rib cage and electronic looking type piece, which has the Proffieboard underneath, which is insulated. It has to be insulated, so you can't change it from this yellow colour, as obviously this board is so close in contact to the steel of this piece here, so you can't really avoid not insulating that, so it has to be insulated. But this piece here is actually removable. There are a couple of magnets on it that hold it in place, so you can take this off and get access to the SD card and the USB port if you need to. It also shows my logo in there, so you remember who made this. Anyway, so actually, while I'm in there, there is also a connector on here for the OLED. If because at the moment this is just going to stay permanently connected, I thought I'd at least give the option to disconnect the OLED if this sort of becomes annoying and you want to actually take this piece off properly. But yeah, there you go. So that's just connected to the OLED there. That connector will only go in one way, so you can't get that wrong. So on the top we've got the OLED, which I'll show you in a moment. This has a few different animations depending on the font that is selected. We've got the speaker is down here. It's hidden behind this little accent metal piece here. This metal piece is not glued into place. So John, if you want to remove this and polish it up a little bit, then you're more than welcome to. If you can find a way to remove it, then go ahead. But if that's something you don't need to do, then don't worry about it. There's also a little sort of exploded area of the hilt here, which, like I said, because the chassis hasn't been weathered, I'm leaving it up to John to sort of work out how that chassis, that area of the chassis works out. There's a few sort of holes going into the bottom of here. You might need to drill these out a little bit larger if you need to fit any specifically sized wires in there. But you can sort of have like frayed wires coming out of here. There's a couple of holes in the top, not quite as many, but there's a few in the bottom. So if you want to add sort of, you know, rough like internals of the hilt coming out of this point, then you're more than welcome to do that. Just make sure that it, obviously you can see a bit of the rubber of the speaker there. Just make sure it doesn't come into contact with that. And then finally at the bottom we've got the replacement for the lower engine, which is, like I said, not a one-to-one replica of the original KR version, but it is sort of, you know, it fits the rough shape and it is inspired by that piece as well. And this is the piece that later down the line will support the Bluetooth module, but this version of the chassis does not have that. Also on the chassis you can see, I don't know if you can actually, but in there is a little hole, and it will only be on this side in this orientation, and that hole is for where the bottom of the red wire goes on the outside of the hilt. And on the other side we've got this hole right here, so this is where the wire goes on the top side of the hilt when you are plugging all of that back together. So there you go, that's enough talking about the chassis. Let's actually get it on and do a demonstration of what this thing is actually capable of. So here we go. So turning it on, you'll start to see some of the accent LEDs in place, and the OLED screen showing my logo and the crystal animation. Now these buttons up here, they are a little tricky to press sometimes, and if you press it too hard with a nail, it will sort of cut a wire along here. So you do have to be very careful if you do decide to use these buttons. You can sort of just press them, you know, with the end of your finger like that, but they are very, very small and a little bit difficult to press sometimes. But turning it on, you can see the spinning chamber starts going, the crystal starts flickering, and the pipe on the side here starts moving its energy along a little bit faster. So you can see it slows down and the crystal just pulses when it's off. And I'm not sure if you can see it from there. You can kind of see it, but the crystal has a crack in it, as that is a very real part of the Kylo Saber and his sort of background regarding this saber. So you can see the crack very clearly from the outside. The wall where you can look in anyway, because you can't look in from this wall anymore. So what I'll do to demonstrate the fonts is I'll put it back in the top half of the hilt here. It's a little tricky to do. Most of the time what you got to do is you kind of got to lay it on top of a flat surface like this and actually put it in the top like that, because it's a lot easier to just let it sit like that and then put the ring over the top like that. The one thing to note about this ring, by the way, is it has this little cutout here, which is very important that... So it's very difficult to hold all this. It's very important that when you put this ring back on, you line it up with where these buttons are. So I will try and do that now, just to show you. So you line this little cutout up with the buttons like that, because once you take this ring out, the board for these buttons is just floating freely. It's kind of an unfortunate design of the hilt, given that the PCB for this bottom button specifically is resting on this little part here. You know, pressing it now sounds a bit awkward because there's nothing on the back of it, but it won't like break or anything unless you're really harsh with it. But like I said, like just align this this bottom ring up like that, and then leave it to rest like that. When you tighten the screws back in on the side, make sure that this chassis is still centered, because you might unknowingly be pressing down on that motor kill switch that I mentioned earlier. So what to do is take one of the smaller screws and put it in the side like that. And you can sort of hand tighten it a little bit just to get the feel of it. And then once it's in there a little bit, the ring will now be supported and it won't pop up again. So we can now screw that into place. And in tightening that, it will now be secured a little bit. But let's get the other side in as well. So get the other small screw. Make sure it's the small screw, because like I said, if it's the big screw, then you will damage the chassis slightly. So we'll just get that in now. And with that tightened in, the ring is now ready to go, and the chassis is fully secured in place. Let's zoom out a little bit, because it's a little close right now. So here we go. Here is the hilt itself with the chassis exposed and all ready to go. So now that it's back together, let's go through some of the fonts. Like I said, turning it on, you get the boot sound, some of the accent LEDs start up, you get my logo showing up on the screen, and this boots into the unstable font by Kyberphonic. And turning this on, when it's anything from horizontal to anything upright, turning this on will ignite everything all at the same time. As you can see, everything is all on now, showing its animations all properly like that. However, it's a little bit tricky to show, but if you tilt it down, anything from horizontal to down, you can kind of tell the side blades are delayed. So to kind of implicate what it looks like in the original Force Awakens trailer, the blades will come on separately with this font if you hold it facing downwards, but it'll change. You don't have to change anything other than the blade angle when you turn it on. So let's try that again. You can see with the white flash that these side blades are coming on later than the main blade, whereas if you do it upright, they all come on at the same time. So while we have the opportunity to have a look at the chassis, let's see what the chassis actually does while the Saber is on. So turning it on, you can see that this starts to speed up, sort of transmitting its energy between these two components. We've got the flickering crystal in the middle there, along with the spinning chamber to go along with it. We've also got the crystal animation on the OLED screen here, which is showing a slightly different animation to while it was off. So you can see it's flickering quite a lot right now, but if I turn it off, it's flickering a lot less frequently. So there you go. Basically the same goes for the next three fonts. The next three are the three different Kylo movies, all fonts by KSith. This is the KRORssguard font.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
So you'll see by pressing the auxiliary button, it switches now to the Force Awakens font, and I don't know if you noticed, but on the screen there it shows a Kylo Ren animation for selecting this font. Most of the animations on the inside of the chassis are pretty much the same here, so clicking the power button will turn this on. It'll just have different sounds this time. And the motor does the same thing as the unstable font. You'll notice actually that the majority of these animations are basically the same between all of the main Kylo fonts that are installed. So going to the next one, you'll see the Kylo Ren animation again as we move over to the Last Jedi font.
Kylo Ren.
And it has a different sort of title sound to indicate what font is currently selected. So let's turn this one on to show the Last Jedi font. And you can see the OLED screen matches up about the same. And there is the Last Jedi font looking at the inside.
Kylo Ren.
And here we have we've got the Rise of Skywalker version of the Kylo font. Just for now, I'm just having a look at what goes on the inside of the Saber before I go on to more details about these fonts. But there you go. That was the Rise of Skywalker font. Now, the next one's a little different. John's asked me to install the Calibrate font for this Saber. It's a sort of font that kind of makes you look like you're working on the Saber rather than it being more of a, an actual regular Saber font. So with this font, if you have blades plugged in, the blades won't actually do anything when you turn it on. But it's more of a font dedicated to the chassis itself rather than the blades themselves. So let's go to that now. So as I change to it, you can see it says Calibrate on the screen, and it says Calibrate out the speaker as well. The crystal goes white to sort of emulate that kind of working on it kind of look. So turning this on, we have this kind of buffering animation coming out of the side blades and the main blades here. It's a little tricky to see with the plugs in place, but it is still there. You can see for this one that the motor is not spinning at the moment, and it still has this animation here on the side pipe, and this really cool sort of workshop style animation going on the OLED, as if you're building the Saber currently. So what's special about this font is if you click the auxiliary button while this font is on, it will play a sort of interesting sound there, and it will spin the motor for a couple of seconds there for the length of the sound, and then it will turn it off again. And when that happens, it will kind of let a bit of the red energy come out of the crystal, and you'll see as well it comes out of the side here as well. This also happens if you clash. And it also happens if you do a lightning block, which I believe is holding aux and power. Nope, sorry, other way around. Holding power and clicking aux. And then when you let go, there you go. It fades back to normal. Let's do that again. There you go. And it will spin the crystal chamber for as long as you have those buttons held. And then this is the only font where when you turn it off, the OLED screen temporarily there will display the battery life. So if you want to see how much battery is left in the Saber, then you can do that. And if it's getting a little low, it has a removable battery, so you can of course take this out, put it in one of your battery chargers like this one from Sabers, and top it up and have it ready to go again. So clicking the auxiliary button one more time will bring it back to the start of the font. So we'll be back on the unstable font. And here you go, it shows the Kylo Ren animation on the screen there. So that's an in-depth look at the chassis. Let's get the hilt back together, and we'll see a little bit more of the details of the Saber here. So with this, it's very important that you line up the wire clips roughly and make sure that this J-lock here is lining up with the screw, because it won't fit on the other side, and if you try and push it up too high and then twist it, you might end up pulling the motor kill switch, because it kind of sits in the pathway of that area. So if you twist it and it's in the wrong place, not many good things are going to happen. So what we've got to do now is we've got to get the wire back into place. So we can do that by taking this end and threading it through this top clip here. And now this is the really tricky part. We've got to bend this wire over and try and line it up with the little receiver hole on the inside there. You can kind of see that it's connected in there now. And then we have to do the same again with the bottom. Try not to pull it too much, because otherwise the wire will come out of the top that we just placed. So bend it round and then feed it into the bottom of the chassis in the lower engine there, and kind of push on both ends maybe to just adjust it to the right shape there. And then there you go, that's the wire back in place. And now the last thing that we've got to do is put the large screw in the back here to secure the lower half of the hilt. Now doing this, it will get a little tricky to tighten it at some point, but this is one of those screws that you have to tighten a little bit harder than you think. It will sort of start resisting, but like don't massively over tighten it, like just finger tight it like that. But it will resist a little bit, but that's part of what I was mentioning about my chassis sort of being semi-structural to the hilt, that sort of helps with that. So that's a massive look at every single detail on the inside of the chassis. Let's have another quick look at those fonts, and then we'll move on to blades. So here it is, the final thing, with all its fonts ready to go, and it's on, and we are ready to have a look at all of these styles. So, like I said, here is the unstable font. And like I said, like holding it upright will turn everything on at the same time. Holding it downwards, you can see by the reflections here that the side blades are delayed there. So each of these fonts has a music track associated with it. So the unstable font has this track. I'll just play it for a couple of seconds. It has the main Kylo theme, which you can have on and play at the same time that the Saber itself is on. So I can turn it on now, and then give it a swing. It's fully installed with Proffieboard and Smooth Swing 2. So we've got clashes, we've got lockup, we've got blaster blocks by clicking the aux button there. We've got the quotes by holding the power button for a second while it's on. So there you go. That is the unstable font. Now let's move over to the Force Awakens font.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
And this font has a different track to before. Each of these sort of Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker fonts will have different tracks that came from their respective movies. So this one will have a different track. I won't play it now because YouTube gets funny about that kind of thing. But let's turn it on and have a look. And like I said earlier, to do a lightning block, you hold the power button and click the aux button. Just like that. Right, so let's move over to the Last Jedi font.
Kylo Ren. What could you give me? Everything.
And finally, we'll move to the Rise of Skywalker font.
Kylo Ren.
All of the K-Sith fonts, so the ones from the actual movies, they don't have anything different in terms of ignition like the unstable font does. The unstable font is the only one that has anything like that.
I want that map. For your sake, I suggest you get it.
Yeah, there you go. So the last font is, like I said before, it's the Calibrate font, but this doesn't have anything particularly special in terms of being in the hilt. It's more, like I said, it's more of a chassis font than a hilt font, but you can still use it a little bit with no blades in. And I didn't show this before, but it does have some movement capability. And it does have lockup as well. There we go. And clicking the aux button one more time, we are back to the start. So what I'll do now, I will show what the blades look like, and I will try and demonstrate what exactly some of the styles look like. So the first thing that we got to do is swap from our 2mm Allen wrench to a 1.5mm Allen wrench, and those are used for the grub screws in the side. Now you've got to be very careful with taking these screws out, not to scratch the clear coat that I've put on. But there are two screws here. There's one at the back that supports the NeoPixel connector, and then there's one at the front that supports the blade plug, and it's the one at the front that you want to unscrew. So just unscrew that until it's just, you can kind of see it from that far away, but it's just sitting above the surface there. You might need to put a finger in there and pull these plugs out. And you can see these are the modular chassis system plugs combined with the original KRORssguard crossguard plugs with the upper half, instead of having a metal lower half that would literally make the Saber explode. So while you're doing this, try and avoid touching the side quillions as much as you can, because obviously the Proplicator is professional at what he does in terms of all of these side blades. I am less so, and I don't want to have to cause any extra damage to these side blades. So this top grub screw, you really don't have to undo it very far. It's a very, very short grub screw. And then the top blade plug comes out here, which I've sanded down to make sure that it can just sit in there like that. It's not particularly supposed to be a tight fit. So I've sanded this down to make it a little bit easier to insert. So what I'll do, because I don't have a lot of space here, I'll tilt the Saber this way so that I can insert the main blade. It's always a little bit tricky getting the main blade in, because you've kind of got to hold it in place like that. And I would highly, highly suggest doing the main blade first out of the three, because then you are less likely to damage these side quillions, as you can you have more freedom to get your Allen key in this way, whereas if your blade is in here, you kind of got to attack it that way and you risk scratching it. So with these side blades, they only go in one way. They will go in either side, but there is a sort of a lip here that is meant to match the angle of the actual hilt here. So you do have to kind of maneuver it a little bit awkwardly. So just screw that in until it is finger tight, just like that. And then we will do the same with the other side. And there we go, just like that. Unfortunately, I can't really put this in frame any better, but we work with what we got. So let's kill the lights and turn this on. John, I'll send you a much better video of what this looks like when I have the freedom to film this properly. But you can see just for now that just having the Saber on just like this, it looks great. Very, very happy with how this has turned out. So you can see by using the blaster blocks, we can still get a couple of white effects on the blade, even though the actual covers for the blades are red. So I'll see if I can demonstrate here what I was talking about with the staggered ignition. So if you hold the hilt upright, you get all of the blades coming on at the same time. Whereas if you hold it facing downwards, you actually get separate ignition. There you go, you can actually see it a lot more clearly now. So that shows you what it looks like with the blades in place. And it is very, very heavy with the blades in. I've tried to reduce the rattle as much as I can, but there is a little bit of rattle still in the blade where the cover isn't quite connected at the bottom. It was quite tricky to have that installed, so that is something that is still there, but it's not something that you necessarily need to worry about. And the blade style is pretty much the same no matter which font you go to.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
The only difference, of course, is you won't have the staggered ignition with the film-based fonts, as there weren't any staggered ignition files for that. So the last thing I'll do, I'll just take these blades out in the opposite order that you put them in. The thing is with these blades is you do sort of need to find like a solid surface to put these in. Otherwise it gets a little tricky. You can't sort of juggle it about like you can with the normal Saber, because there's obviously so many blades. The blades are so heavy, the hilt is so heavy now that it's got a 400-gram chassis in there. You know, there's tons of factors that make this a little different than normal. And getting the blade plugs in, these don't need to sort of connect to anything, they just sit in there, and then you tighten them up with the same Allen key as before. Doesn't really matter which order you do the blade plugs. And just like that, the hilt is all back together. So there you go. That just about covers everything that you need to know about the hilt. John, if you have any more questions or requests about what exactly you want, you know, sort of extra things that you want me to add before I send this back to you, then I'm happy to make any changes. But apart from that, even if you just come to watch this to have an in-depth look at my new Kylo chassis, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching. And John, I will have this in the post back to you very, very soon. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.